Today, I am going to be talking about the four foundations of mindfulness. And this is a teaching that is extremely important in other branches of Buddhism, as well as Tibetan Buddhism. First of all, the foundation is in the title. So these are foundations for our practice. And of course, practice is an extremely important role in traveling the path. So if we are going to travel the path, we need to have a good foundation for developing the motivation to practice and then actually practicing. In a way, these are trainings in developing wisdom. And these are four basic contemplations: the contemplation of the body, the contemplation of bodily sensations, feelings, contemplation of mind, and then contemplation of outer phenomena. We need to understand these at a deep level so that we can have a stable, suitable ground to progress on towards awakening. Now, they are as much contemplation as anything, and there's not something that you have to contemplate every day, every time you practice, but it is good to contemplate them from time to time, especially if you find yourself getting distracted by worldly affairs. It is so easy to become distracted in the world today. There are a million different things that can cause distraction. All you have to do is go to your digital device and get on the internet, and there's umpteen platforms, and you can keep busy the next 24 hours. Well, these four contemplations can be viewed through the Hinayana, or the foundation level, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche has done that, and so I'm going to be following his example and his teaching in this topic. Now, the three different vehicles present the teaching slightly different approaches, but ultimately they are the same. It's not like they're three different things. So the first is mindfulness of body. This is the contemplation about really what is our body. We have a tendency to take our body for granted. Of course, we can say, well, I know that it's impermanent, that it changes, and so on, but we don't behave that way. We don't behave like we really feel that way. The phrase that I have been using lately is, a lot of times we have our life on cruise control, and we don't really take into consideration impermanence. The fact that you might not wake up tomorrow. Impermanence means not only is the body subject to death, it is subject to illness. It gradually deteriorates during our lifetime. And there are many other aspects to it that we don't really look deeply at. So this is why we start with mindfulness of the body, paying attention to the body, what it really is, and what's important, and how to use our body. To begin with, then, we frequently think of our body as a solid entity. And if we look closely, we see that the body is not a solid entity, that it has parts: the upper body, the lower body, the head, the hands, joints, and so forth. Then there are internal parts to the body: lungs, heart, other organs, skin, muscle, blood, and so forth. So we can look at our body as a collection of parts. Another way that is traditional to look at the body is to see that it is made up of the five elements. The parts of the body that are solid and hard, like the bones, are connected to the earth element. Whatever is moist in the body are connected to the water element. The heat of the body is connected to the fire element. respiration and movement of the inner winds is connected with the air element. And then, of course, we need the space element for all of this to have space to happen in. So by examining either of these ways, this counteracts the habitual pattern of thinking that our body is one solid entity and instead see it as a collection of components, and that these components are constantly changing, which brings the next contemplation here with mindfulness of body, and that is to look at impermanence and change. When we are born, our bodies start changing very quickly. We start putting on weight, we grow in height, we develop more abilities with our body, and on and on and on. Then we go from toddlers to young children, and then there are preteens and teens, and then young adults, and on and on and on. And then pretty soon we're having a middle-age crisis, and then we're looking at retirement, and yada, yada, yada. It's so easy to think where we are right now. There's nothing else happening unless an old memory comes up and we go, oh, where did that come from? The point is that our bodies are constantly changing, and that we have less control over these changes than we think we do. Again, it's so easy to just ignore these and not pay attention to the meaning of these changes. And change can occur in an instant. You can go to the doctor like my dad did with a slight stomach upset, and he ended up having his gallbladder removed. The nurse told me, the gallbladder was gangrenous, that how could he tolerate that pain? But he did. He even questioned me later. Well, I don't understand this. I went there with a stomach ache and I ended up having my gallbladder removed. Well, worse things can happen. You could get a diagnosis of cancer, or you could go in and come out on a gurney at a funeral home. These changes can happen very, very quickly. I have said this before. I have had a number of friends that died quite healthy because they were in accidents. We think we have a lot of control in our lives, but when it gets right down to it, maybe not. One moment we have finished a big meal, 4 hours later, we're looking for another one. It's amazing how quickly that changes. We can experience physical pain, and for some reason or another, it disappears. Sometimes it doesn't disappear, but these things happen, and that is the way our body works. So it's very important to contemplate all of these different aspects of the body, to realize that we don't have the control that we think we do. The body is impermanent, and that by keeping this in mind, we can be less distracted by pleasures of the body. Another contemplation is to look at the body to see if it really is as pure as we think it is. So consider a human corpse. And after several days, if it hasn't been preserved in any way, you can see this with wild animals too, that after several days, flies have started to gather around it. Maybe insects are living on the flesh of this animal. They look pretty repulsive. And the only thing that prevents our bodies from that is that we're alive. And then in this country, we have laws that require you to be either embalmed or cremated or something else. But you don't have corpses in the cemetery next to me laying out on the ground like they might in India. But this is important. A lot of people are even very uncomfortable going to a funeral home to attend a funeral, because it's such a strong, powerful reminder of their own impermanence. So think about the slight difference between your body as it's alive and the body of a dead person. And then also, it's always good to again, contemplate that inside of our body is blood, pus, urine, excrement, phlegm, and so forth that is not so likable. This is really what is inside of us, and we get so fixated with attachment to what our body looks like on the outside. And this is something from my own personal experience, again, because my grandmother ran a funeral home and I worked in the funeral home. First of all, you embalm the body, and the embalming fluid is tinted so that it restores the pink color to the flesh. Even after my grandmother retired, she was still in charge of doing the hair and the makeup on the women. And a really good compliment you can give a mortician is saying the person in the casket looks better now than they did when they were alive. This is kind of bizarre from a Tibetan standpoint. I've heard Tibetan translators talk about this. And in fact, I led a funeral recently down in Eau Claire, and the funeral home didn't even have funeral home in the name. It was kind of like a center for celebration of life. If that isn't denial, I'm not sure what is. So we really need to understand the truth of the situation that we're in, and with that understanding, apply our lives to practicing the Dharma. To use our body now, well, it is physically able to be used. If we don't put it to good use now, the body will deteriorate, and basically not much benefit will come from our present life. In fact, if we don't practice now, we will accumulate a lot of negative karma trying to pamper our bodies, and that will be detrimental in our future life. So we have a choice. Are we going to do things that will benefit us in our future life, or will we do things that will be a problem in our future life? Khenpo Karta Rinpoche illustrated this point with the example of a person that bought a pair of nice shoes. The person tied the shoelaces together on both shoes and threw them over their shoulder, one in front and one in the back, and then walked barefoot because they didn't want to hurt their shoes. They didn't want to wear out their shoes. And it resulted in sore feet, but it doesn't make any sense. Shoes are to protect your feet and not to be carried around. So if we don't practice, it's a bit like that. We have this body, we're protecting it, and we're not using it. And as a result, we're not getting very far on the path. Again, it's very important to realize that our body is impermanent, it's subject to deterioration, and now is the time to practice rather than getting hung up on trying to have as pleasant circumstances as possible. He also points out that practice can lead to some physical discomfort or even pain and other difficulties with practice, but this is not negative. There is tremendous benefit from tolerating difficulties through practice. Shanti Deva explains this a little bit differently, but it's also very clear. Here, the metaphor is that the body is a servant of the mind, and the mind is really the leader, and the mind must learn how to guide the body. So when you pamper your body, it's like hiring a servant and then letting the servant sleep while you do the work yourself. And of course, this is impractical and it doesn't make any sense. We need to make that servant of our body do the work and to take care of us in the long run. A servant needs to get paid. We're not talking about a slave. And we need to take care of our body by eating proper food, wearing warm clothing in this time of the year, maybe proper footwear for the snow, and so forth. So it doesn't mean completely ignoring our body, but it means taking care of it, but not excessively, putting the importance of practice above the importance of having pleasant circumstances. to the detriment of practicing. So if we can practice and not cling to the body, our mind accumulates merit, we develop spiritual qualities, and there is tremendous benefit from these physical efforts of a lot of practice. Again, using Shantideva as an example, it is the same way when you have a hardworking servant. So we do not want to let this body, you might say, have a very easy life without any benefit to our minds. I think we're all familiar with this. The more pleasure our body experiences, the more we want. That it does not satisfy us. It just leads to wanting more and more and more. It's also important to remember that it's impossible in the long run to protect our body from any form of discomfort. And it is impossible to live forever, and it's impossible to live without getting sick and old. So these are not things that only happen to other people, that these are going to probably already have happened to us. So this contemplation of the impermanence of the body and the body being made up of parts and so forth, all of this is to help lessen our attachment to our body and to motivate us to use the body in a way that is meaningful to our minds, and to tolerate physical difficulties and other problems that arise in practice. This is the foundation level approach. Now, the Mahayana approach uses all of that. It doesn't negate any of that, but it also then tries to encourage you to recognize that the body is not a unified entity, goes into this in more detail. It comes from the viewpoint of emptiness. So the body is made up of many parts, and then these parts can be taken apart into smaller parts, and smaller parts, and the smaller parts. So you can have heads, hands, legs, and so forth. And then underneath that, you've got tissue, muscle tissue, tendons, bones, blood, and so forth. And then they are made up of smaller things, cells, compounds, atoms, molecules, on and on and on. In India, they came up with a term that is frequently translated into atom in English. And this is a particle that, and this was done using logic, not any kind of science, a particle that has no top or bottom or sides, a particle that is not made up of other particles. Now, modern science, they come up with subatomic particles, string theory, and other things that I don't even know about, that I'm not going into. Basically, it means that things aren't as they appear, that it's mostly energy and space. So this would be the Mahayana approach, that you take these parts into smaller parts and smaller parts, and you eventually come down to there's nothing there that is real, true, or concrete, that the body is insubstantial. Even though we might take our body to be real and substantial, it is not. Now, this doesn't mean that the body doesn't appear. It does, but it is appearance emptiness. And then on top of that, the labels that we put on the parts have no existence. They're just words. They're just terms. Really good example of this is a painting by René Magritte, who was a Belgian surrealist painter. And it was a very realistic painting of a pipe that you would smoke. And underneath it in French, he wrote, "This is not a pipe." And his commentary on this painting was, "This is not a pipe. You cannot fill it and smoke it. It's a picture of a pipe." And the word pipe is on this painting. Now, this is my Buddhist analysis. You cannot fill the word pipe with tobacco and smoke it. And you cannot fill the concept of pipe with tobacco and smoke it. it's all empty of inherent reality. It's just labels. So this is the Mahayana understanding of using emptiness as a further level of understanding the parts and the pieces that make up our body. So then the last is the Vajrayana. What we have here is we visualize ourselves as an enlightened being made out of light with no inherent existence, no internal organs, that we try to realize that our ultimate nature is that of the deity, similar to a rainbow in the sky or a reflection in a mirror. Again, no solidity, but appearance. The question is, how do you find this balance between pushing your body further than you perhaps would if you didn't do this contemplation, but on the other hand, pushing it too far and maybe actually causing physical problems with the body? And this is always a difficult balance. It's very easy in a Western culture to pamper our bodies. This is something I have noticed time and time again when it comes to nundro and prostrations, physical prostrations. I remember somebody asking Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche about physical prostrations and saying, "I'm sweating." And his answer was, of course, good. Our bodies are capable of doing much more than we give them credit for. Again, we have to be careful. We're not Milarepas. We can't just go out and live on nettles in the middle of the mountains of Tibet or the Rocky Mountains. So it is a balance. I once had a translator tell me, this was before I did a 3-year retreat, I think even, that it is the Lama's or the Guru's job to push the student further than they would push themselves. So when it gets down to it, if you're talking about physical exertion, my experience, and I can't say that this is 100% correct, aches and pains and sore muscles are not a big deal, but when you have sharp pains, that's a problem. If you're doing something like prostrations, work into it gradually, little by little, and as you progress, you will develop more strength. You can see I'm sitting in a chair, not on a cushion, because I broke my ankle, and one of these days I'm going to try to get my body back into sitting on a cushion on the floor, but gradually. I guess another area is Nyungne, where we go without food for an extensive period of time and even go without drinking liquids for an extensive period of time. And it takes some, I guess wisdom is a good word for this, to know what your body is capable of, what your mind is capable of. But again, don't just, oh, I can't do that, da, 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 da. Gradually, by pushing yourself further than you would ordinarily, you start learning more about how your body works, how your mind works, and so forth. It's not an all or nothing situation. And always pay attention to feedback.